In April, the Supreme Court ruled that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act refer to biological sex, not gender identity. And this clarifies that gender recognition certificates do not change someone's legal sex for the purpose of single-sex services. But many groups and organisations still seem to be ignoring this landmark ruling. So I'm joined now to discuss this by the journalist and director of advocacy at Sex Matters, Helen Joyce. Helen, welcome to the show. I want to start by asking you about this ruling. Back in April, we have clarification about what the Equality Act actually means. So all presumably is well and good now, is that right?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, it was really a masterpiece of clarity, 88 pages of cool, calm prose in which the judges didn't just say unanimously that in the Equality Act, sex means sex, not paperwork. They also explained why, with the principles behind that, and they spelled out what it meant for single-sex spaces, for sports, for services, and so on. And you'd think that we could just sort of go home now, wouldn't you? But it turns out that a lot of people who don't like the ruling are pretending they don't understand the ruling, which is obviously a different matter. And 2 months later, we're watching, incredibly, a lot of organisations, including, for example, the Houses of Parliament, saying that they are not going to do anything about rules that said that men can go into women's spaces until they're told they have to do it by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And not just them, but teachers' unions, hospitals, police forces, employers all over the country, let's see who else, and universities, all of them pretending that either this doesn't apply to them or it's too confusing or that they need further guidance. But the law is the law. It's extraordinary to live in a nation where people just ignore the law when it doesn't suit them. Now,
Helen, I want to ask about this because, I'm not a legal mind, but even I understood what the Supreme Court said. It seemed absolutely clear to me. Why would I need to wait for guidance from the EHRC to simply reiterate what has been so candidly expressed?
Because you didn't want what was so candidly expressed is the only possible reason. The Supreme Court is literally the highest legal authority in the land. What the Supreme Court says goes, and not only does it go the second they say it, it actually tells us what the interpretation should have been since 2010. So any organisation that misunderstood the law before, and to be honest, a lot did, the Scottish Government, the UK Government and the Equality and Human Rights Commission all thought that what sex meant in the Equality Act was paperwork, so that if someone had a gender recognition certificate, they in effect changed sex for the purposes of the Equality Act. They did think that, and organisations that set policies based on that had a reason for doing so. But the second the Supreme Court spoke, that was no longer true. It had never been true. And to be in legal compliance, you really have to move with all possible haste to get your policies in line. And yet everybody's pretending that some pre-existing work that the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, is doing to update its code of practice for service providers has to be waited for. But that people like the police forces and governments and employers, who else, like lots, it's only service provision that this is about. It's not about employment.
So can you give us some...
Really, there's no reason.
Can you give us some specific examples of organisations that are ignoring this ruling?
Oh, well, I can tell you the House of Commons and the House of Lords are. They were asked, would they update their guidance, which says that you should be able to use single-sex spaces according to which ones you prefer. And they said that they wouldn't until the EHRC brought out its guidance. The Houses of Parliament said that. And then on Wednesday, there was a meeting of the Women and Equalities Select Committee to grill the boss of the EHRC, the chair, Baroness Kishore Faulkner, and a trans-identifying barrister, Robin Moira-White, attended, and he went to the women's toilets and was asked to leave by two women who were also in attendance. And they called a member of staff, and the member of staff said no, that they wouldn't ask a trans-identifying man to leave the women's toilets. He said the person apparently said, we don't do that here. And they have now apologised and recognised that they need to retrain their staff. But we had already asked them, would they please update their guidance? And they had said no, that they were going to wait.
And what about schools as well? Because my understanding is the National Education Union has put out some very misleading information about this as well.
Well, it came up at their conference, I think, certainly at a meeting or at a conference, and they said that trans-identifying teachers should be allowed to continue to use the opposite sex's toilets. I presume that they also think this for students, but none of this is now lawful. It's astonishing that everybody is saying it's very confusing, that it's too hard to implement. What they're saying there, in effect, is that trans people can't be trusted to follow the rules. Everybody knows what sex they are. If they're told that if you're male, don't go into female-only spaces, everybody who's male knows that fact. even if they no longer identify as male, they know that they really are. So they shouldn't go in. So this is just it's an incredible backhanded sort of insult to trans people that they can't be trusted to follow rules that are there for everybody's safety and well-being.
Yes, because one of the constant arguments I hear is that, well, this is impossible to police. How are you going to police this? But isn't the responsibility on each individual to make the choice in a court not to break the law, in other words?
Well, especially for somebody like a barrister like Robin Moira-White. I mean, it's not like you can say he doesn't understand the law, is it? Yes, it's a bit like speed limits. We do enforce speed limits, but we do it by spot checks. And, the fact is that if it's 4 a.m. and it's a country road, you're going to get away with it if you break the speed limit. Doesn't mean we say, oh, we can't have speed limits. It's a bit like that. We don't need toilet police. Everybody knows what sex they are. Everybody can see the signs. If you're not able to read or you're from abroad and you don't understand the words male or female, you know what the pictograms are. And you shouldn't go into somewhere that's not for your sex. And increasingly, there are excellent unisex options. So, for example, in Portcullis House, where that meeting was on Wednesday, the room that the meeting was in, it's precisely the same distance from the women's toilets, the men's toilets, and a unisex accessible option. So Robin had the choice of all of them. He could have gone to the men's or he could have gone to the unisex one, but he chose to go into the women's.
So why has this happened, Helen? Can I ask? Because I know that for a number of years now, Stonewall and other groups like Stonewall have been accused of representing the law as they would like it to be, not as it actually is. That's a quotation from Akua Reindorf there. Do you think that it's been the influence of campaign groups such as Stonewall misrepresenting the Equality Act that this has just stuck now and people have trusted activists all along?
I think that's correct. And I also think that people are afraid to change the rules because they know that trans people have been very much misled about their legal rights. Trans people have been told themselves that they have the right to go into whichever space they want and that anyone who says they can't must be a bigot. So they know they're going to be disappointing quite a lot of people who include some, quite violent people. As Baroness Kishore-Falconer said on Wednesday, she said, she has been personally threatened. Her staff have been threatened. The EHRC's offices have had a deeply unpleasant protests outside them, including somebody pouring urine all around the door. So, you know which side, as she said, which side is going to be unpleasant. The women who've been campaigning for single-sex spaces to mean genuinely single-sex have been polite, organised, have done so within the law. We sought to get the law clarified and we succeeded. But there are some people, a minority, but some people on the other side who have been violent, who have been quite aggressive and disgusting in online and in person. And I think a lot of people are quite cowardly about this. They're all waiting for somebody else to jump. They're waiting to be taken to court or waiting to be told what to do in terms that a 5-year-old understands by the EHRC.
And we should say, of course, that your organisation, Sex Matters, has been instrumental in this, and also For Women Scotland, who took the case against the Scottish Parliament in order to clarify the law. But finally, Helen, can I ask you, all of these organisations and sometimes charities, they're posting online their intention to break the law. Isn't that a rather silly thing to do?
Absolutely. I mean, people like the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, and the Charity Commission, in my opinion, should already be acting when charities and employers say that they're going to break the law. But I can assure people that we will continue to take people to court if they break the law. We've already worked out some people that we think that we need to talk to who have been major. Like, for example, Kenwood Ladies Pond, the Hampstead Women's Pond. They continue to say that men who identify as women should be allowed to use the ladies' pond. And remember, there are 3 ponds there. There's a men's pond, a women's pond, and a mixed pond. So everyone has somewhere to go. And yet they're still saying that they're going to allow men into the ladies. Anyone who's doing this can expect the wrong side of a legal action, frankly.
OK, well, it sounds like it's going to have to be lawfare all the way, probably. Helen Joyce, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. That was Helen Joyce from Sex Matters. So the House of Commons have now apologised in an email to both Miss Harris and Miss Binning after allowing a trans-identified male to use female-only lavatories. The House of Commons also said, "We continue to act in full compliance with the law as set out in the Supreme Court's judgment, and we remain committed to treating all those who work in or visit Parliament with respect, providing support to colleagues where needed." In the Hampstead Ponds case, a spokesperson for the City of London Corporation said, "These accusations accusations are completely false. The City Corporation is compliant with existing UK law. In line with other affected organisations, we are carefully considering the judgment and awaiting statutory guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which service providers must take into account. And Daniel Kabadi from the General Secretary of the NEU said the guidance from the EHRC is wholly lacking. We have written to the Secretary of State for Education and have made it clear there is urgent need for information, advice and support for schools and colleges. So